Philipp and Ian, welcome back. Thank you for being here again.
Happy to be back.
Exactly.
Well, if you guys missed our most recent episode together, I will link in the show notes. We got to go really deep on quantum energy, and it was absolutely fascinating. And in this episode, I really want to tackle a topic that I know is top of mind for a lot of moms in particular, which is the topic of EMF exposure, the potential health impacts of that, and what we can do about that. And I know this is a broad topic as well, but to start off, can you guys walk us through what some of the issues linked to EMF exposure are? And then I want to talk about some cutting edge ways to harmonize and or mitigate that people may not be aware of.
Absolutely. So something that most people don't really know about my background, but I used to be vice president at T-Mobile in Europe, responsible for 14 countries and also T-Mobile US. So I know the EMF industry from the other side, if you will. And I'm not in the camp of saying EMFs are just all bad, because they frankly have great use. They add a lot of convenience to our lives, and I don't think we will go back. Like the option is not now, oh, because there's negative effects, that we tear down all the cell phone towers and then be done with it. That's not going to happen because of various reasons. So the solution can only be, from my perspective, something that makes us, we can still use it, but we mitigate the negative effects at the same time, which we'll get into how we actually achieved to do that. But the negative effects is really, it's a specific waveforms that hit our energy system and physical system in a way that it's adding stress. So whether that's from 3G, 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi, microwaves, sitting in an electronic car, and with that I mean just a gas-operated car that has a lot of electronics, and then even worse, way worse, actually sitting in an electric car where you have a battery and you have all the electronics, and it's just you getting blasted literally. And you can use an EMF meter to just test that. And so the health effects range from short-term to mid-term to really long-term. Long-term, you find a lot of the C word. You find mid-term infertility issues on both females and male side, actually quite significant. You find autoimmune diseases significantly skyrocketing. Dr. Klinghardt is at the forefront of research in that regard, and he looked at the rollout of the different Gs and then the increase of autoimmune diseases in the world, and it's absolutely fascinating, and it's quite sad if you look at that actually. And then short term, you can already measure within minutes that it has an impact on your autonomic nervous system. The heart rate variability could be measured, for example. It has an impact on your blood. Your blood literally clots when you get exposed to Wi-Fi, if you were previously in a Wi-Fi free environment. And we've seen this in our studies, by the way. And yeah, there's other effects, right, that it has on our system, on the cell functions, etc. So that's all something we should take seriously. I want to mention, because sometimes people have an issue finding a lot of the data around this, when they Google, but there are a few industry-funded studies that say, well, there isn't such a big deal. And then you have thousands of peer-reviewed independent studies that have also been done over years and years of research, and they all show the same thing, including the midterm and the short-term studies. It's a really big issue. Now, the good news is we don't need to be fearful as long as we're mindful of that this is out there. Let's look at solutions. And I don't know, Ian, if you want to add anything.
Well, just one of the things that I get very frequently from other scientists is in terms of EMF. EMF is, electromagnetic field. And so, we're all used to being part of, all of the spectrum of EMF. But a lot of times people are like, oh, well, you can't stop it unless you block it. And it's such a shockingly common thing that I hear. And it still flummoxes me because I don't, there's so many examples in normal everyday life of how that is obviously not the case. It's like, well, that's why everyone in every office building is naked because it was hot. So they all took off their clothes because there's no other way to deal with mitigating that issue. Well, there's this thing called air conditioning. It works pretty well, right? I mean, you don't have to hit something dead on through only one direction. You can think your way through it. And so in terms of harmonizing with EMFs, I think a lot of people sometimes get flustered with the term harmonizing, but the reality is you don't have to eliminate a waveform to negate its impact, right? If you have ever listened to music and something happens like, oh, I don't know, the refrigerator kicks in, or you're listening to something on the phone or on the television and a lawnmower kicks in, those are quite literally waveforms that are impacting other waveforms. And in those cases, it's, disturbing, but any sort of disturbance means that you're affecting the waveforms, right, as you perceive them. So by virtue of the fact that you can mitigate, say, temperature is something that exists in a physical space, and it's because energy is moving in one or the other direction. That energy is moving in a wave, very subtly, but it is in fact a wave. That's why you can measure thermal emissiveness. So when people look at this, I would just hope that scientists especially keep an open mind and actually look at the reality of where we are in the manifest tangible universe and go, yeah, there's a couple of ways to skin that cat, and realize that you don't have to hit something head on. You don't have to block out EMFs in your head by wearing a tinfoil hat. You can do other things, and the technologies that we have, I've seen firsthand the effects, and you can actually image the effects. Dark field microscopy is great, and for anybody who's, I think it's on the site, the images of what people's blood looks like when exposed to EMF, and then what it looks like when it's exposed to EMF and being stimulated via a block or a heel capsule or something like that, or the coats or a bunch of the different modalities. You can say what you want, but when you look at the pictures, truly, in this case, a picture is worth 1,000 words. There is such a profound shift so rapidly that it's obvious that it's not something else. It is a direct correlate. I mean, that is what's happening and why. So I just would ask that people think a little more clearly about it.
I love that perspective. And I think that's really valuable and important, especially in today's world, because like you said, Philip, EMFs are not likely to go away. Even if we had the ability to just get rid of the cell phone towers and get rid of all of it, I think that would create quite the uproar, to say the least. So this is now a technology that's likely to be a part of our lives for the rest of our lives. And so if we can't avoid it, and as I and you explained, that might not even be the best option, is to just simply block it. It's how do we then mitigate or harmonize with it? I love that word, to avoid the negative effects of it without having to live in our tinfoil hats in the woods in a bunker with no cell phone.
Well, I was actually going to propose that the next time we do a podcast like this, we all find very giant pieces of string and some Dixie cups and string them across the country from one another to the other ones. Yeah, I mean, Philip's right. We're not gonna move backwards. I actually am kind of ever the optimist on this. The technology is new, and we're kind of muddling our way through it. But I actually think that rather than think of it, if you know that waves are impacting people physiologically, rather than say, oh, it's awful, stop it, why not say, well, what if we enhanced it? What could we do to actually make it better? Not just to mitigate it, but actually make it better. If you know that you can change the voltage gated calcium ion potential and express influx and efflux differently inside cells to a detrimental effect, well, it would stand to reason that you could do it to a positive effect as well. Most things in nature have that damn cycle, that old sine wave. It seems to be kind of a recurrent theme. And I think if we just approached it like that, we'd actually look at it and go, okay, what do we do next, right? We're exposed to these things. How can we use them to make us more powerful and smarter and more resilient to disease? I mean, Philip, you and I have talked about this. I think that should be the next iteration of it, is we actually take this kind of technology and leverage it to make the average person healthier in lieu of sicker.
Yeah, I love that. And you just use a bunch of big words that might have been a little over that some people's heads who are listening. I know we've used the term dark field microscopy a lot, so I would love for you guys to just quickly explain what that is and how that relates to how our understanding of how this impacts health, but then more importantly, explain how the technologies we're talking about are able to change the way that our bodies are interacting with EMFs in a way that I love, like you said, not just mitigate it, but actually could create a positive cascade versus a negative one.
Yes, so dark field microscopy, also known as live blood analysis, can look at the blood in a magnified and illuminated fashion so that you can literally see in real time your own blood, but you don't see it like you would look at just a blood drop like that. You look under a microscope and you can see the blood cells. You can see the blood cells, the white blood cells, the red blood cells. You see how oxygenated the blood is. You can even detect things like parasitic load and things like that. So it's the best tool actually to see what is actually going on in someone's blood, right? And you can then look, if you introduce something, what happens, what changes, because you can look at it in real time. You can take pictures, you can take a video, and so on. And it's been found that Wi-Fi, 4G, 5G, all of this actually clogs the blood and also tends to paralyze white blood cells, which is very detrimental. And that happens within minutes, literally. So to explain real quick what was shown by the Base Institute in Austria and by Dr. Beverly Rubik in the US, they had a Wi-Fi free environment, and the test person got tested. Now I'm referring to Dr. Rubik's study because all studies were a little bit different. Then she turned Wi-Fi on, and it was instantly visible that the blood started to clot. And within just a few minutes, it was a terrible picture that even someone that doesn't know anything about live blood analysis would tell you, ooh, that does not look healthy. Now, then Wi-Fi was left on and a sham device or our real device was introduced. That is important to rule out any placebo effects, not that you can later say, well, it was always the real device and they knew it, and that's why it could be a placebo effect. No, you use the sham device that is not charged and one that looks exactly the same that is charged. And it was clearly visible that with our technology, even though Wi-Fi was still on, 100% of the visible negative effects on the blood were neutralized within just a few minutes. In this case, I think they had 10 minutes as the marker, and that's quite significant. So again, to reiterate, even stage 1 and stage 2 of blood clotting was able to be reversed within minutes. White blood cell activity motility increased, parasitic load in the blood decreased. And yeah, those were just some of those markers. But across the board, it was significant, not just marginal.
That's so fascinating. And I feel like in Europe, the few times I've been there in a health and wellness setting, they use this much more often than we do in the US. But I find it so fascinating, especially because it's an easier way to test, a lower barrier of entry and rapid results to be able to see what's going on. I also have gone, before I met you guys, I went down the EMF mitigation / blocking rabbit hole for a while and was researching everything from the shielded paints to you need to have certain things on all the wires in your house, and it was going to be astronomically expensive to do all of this. So I was very grateful to find something that was research backed and way less of a hurdle than that was. But can you talk a little bit about what distinguishes the technologies you guys are talking about from maybe some other methods that people have heard of, and any specific advice related to environments or types of EMFs that can be especially beneficial in a home setting?
Yeah, and by the way, so we also offer EMF blocking clothing, and it's the only EMF blocking clothing in the world that is also charged with our technology. So usually you use a high purity silver fabric to actually block the EMF, but silver is amazing in holding and transmitting quantum energy. So if you charge that metal that already blocks EMF, then you suddenly have a source that also sends out the positive vibration of the quantum energy into your energy field. Then you have basically two positive effects, right? Which is quite fascinating, and that can be useful, especially for people that are very sensitive, or in situations where you have a high exposure, let's say in an airplane, as an example. And yeah, I mean, then there's other technologies out there that, look at, yeah, I mean, blocking, I covered that. There's EMF blocking clothing. You said there's paint. Of course, you could try to wrap aluminum foil around your house. I think that is something I would not recommend to anyone, frankly. I don't think these efforts, it's good thinking at first, because as long as you don't know that there's something out there that can actually easily just change the waveform patterns, and then you don't have a problem with that, it's great thinking. But it wouldn't be that great, because you would also block the native EMFs, like from the sun, for example, and a lot of that radiation that comes from the earth and from the sun is something we want to take in. We're here for a reason, and I don't think we need to do that. It's just a lot of this artificial stuff that we created that is quite harmful. And then there's other technologies out there. There's stickers for the phones out there. We tested 13 of those. None of them worked at all. So I don't know, maybe there is one out there that works, but I would be very, very careful with stickers you can buy on Amazon that you put on your phone. And then, yeah, there's some other devices out there that mitigate EMF, but then they would only do that. So the beauty about a Leela block is that it takes care of all the EMF issues in a huge radius, first of all, not just in a very localized environment, but in a huge radius. And on top of that, you can do so many other things, right? In a super simple manner. Even a 5-year-old kid can operate our blocks and can put their phone in there, or a glass of water, or their cacao, or whatever, and charge that, right? And have the benefits of it. So that's useful. If you have a pet, you can help your pet with it. There's so many use cases. And I think that's what's so unique about it, that EMF, yeah, sure, it covers that, but that's not the only thing you can do with it.
That makes sense. It's a both and especially with the rise, I know a lot of moms are concerned with the rise of 5G, and especially a lot of the more typical shielding things you mentioned. There's doubts of if they even work really well with 5G. And so I love that this is something that is beneficial in all of those aspects. And I feel like not talked about enough. You mentioned they don't block the native EMFs. I feel like we've been conditioned to think all EMFs are bad, but we get beneficial native EMFs from, I love that you brought up the earth, and especially the sun. I think conventional medical wisdom has done us a disservice in the last few decades with the recommendation to entirely avoid the sun. And I now make that a very intentional part of my daily routine. But if you're able, can you elaborate a little bit on how things like those native beneficial EMFs from the earth or the sun, and or if so, explain how things like mindfulness and meditation can actually enhance the effects of these technologies as well?
Mm-hmm. And I'll hand over to Ian in 1 or 2 minutes to get into the scientific details of that. But I want to come from the experiential side, right? Because, if someone tells you the sun is not good for you, okay, well, maybe it's not good for you if you're too long in the midday sun and then you develop a sunburn and it hurts. That's maybe then at that point not beneficial to have done it for so long. But if you go out in the sun, just feel into that. Feel into that. You see dogs going outside, baking in the sun for a while when they need it, when they feel their system needs it. Your eyesight improves when you have actual light coming in, and we get recharged literally from the sun. We have vitamin D levels go up in our bodies. That's something we know scientifically. We don't necessarily feel that, but we usually feel better when we're exposed to these natural forces. And that's what I want to tell people, start feeling and sensing again, and trust your own senses versus some narratives. And I'm sure that Ian has some scientific insights for us why the sun is actually beneficial.
I think it's called evolution. You don't as an organism, from quite literally the time there were single and then multicellular organisms, it's all been exposed to light. You know, I mean, there might be some periods of occlusion due to clouds and things like that, but for the most part, we have evolved in a certain way, right? And people for some reason seem to think that they're separate and distinct from nature, and that's not the case. And it's actually very problematic. One of the things with space travel that's interesting is in the absence of the Schumann resonance, you know, the 7.83 to 7.84 frequency that's constantly there, that's sort of the background hum of our planet. Our entire biological evolution has transpired with that being a baseline that's always there. And in the absence of that, in outer space, people go loopy. So it's actually, you know, it's piped in. They make sure that there is actually, and they didn't initially, because they, of course, like everybody else, thought, you know, whatever. I'm a person. I'm completely distinct and separate from my own environment, and not really thinking that, well, you know, the obvious things of, I'm not going to survive very well in outer space without temperature control. I'm not going to survive without oxygen. Well, again, you get to the more subtle things and people lose focus on it, right? They catch the gross things that are glaringly apparent. You know, at 2 degrees Kelvin, you're going to have some issues in terms of your body's functioning at that temperature, right? You know, negative a couple 180 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius. People have issues, right? Unless you're a tardigrade, you're going to have issues. The same thing with air. That's obvious, right? But people didn't really factor in the baseline electrical hum that our organisms have all developed with. That's actually requisite. You have to have it, or you literally go insane. And our technology is similar in that you need to feel those natural things because they're the substrate that we're built on, right? That's what's bolstered us and held us. And from my experience, all of the technologies that we have augment that. They help with it. That's why I think things like meditation are incredibly beneficial, because you're taking someone's own physiology and you're amping up their waveform. That's one of my kind of hypotheses about how this is actually working, because I've seen it work on so many people in so many varied environments with so many different things. It, it doesn't seem like it's a Swiss Army knife that the applicability is because of, you know, the way it's designed. It actually seems that the applicability is there because it's inherent to how we've evolved as creatures, right? We are an expression of waveforms. These are far more subtle. We do, as I alluded to with outer space, we catch temperature, we catch oxygen, but we're more than that, right? Our bodies are leveled with, you know, or layered rather with, you know, electromagnetic things, right? Our photonic things, our mitochondria communicate with little femtosecond pulses of light. You know, so we operate. We've got 4 trillion of those little guys running around, and they're all communicating photonically. That's the basis of how we are. And so, if we know that we communicate with sunlight, the idea that, you know, being in light, where we derive all of our power ionically, where our planet gets that Schumann resonance, and the hum and all of the power for all of the living systems on the planet. Uh, the common wisdom of, yeah, you should stay out of the sun and be separate from that. Yeah, perhaps, you know, maybe I can move into a cave and live on, you know, bland tofu for the rest of my days. I don't actually think that's the way to go. I think biology would sort of dictate that we lean in a little bit more and let these things support us. So as our consciousness comes up, I think this simply makes the waveform that is us as a person, which in my estimation is expressed in our genetics. I think it actually makes us stronger, right? Like everything has an emissive frequency that comes off of it, everything in tangible matter. And our DNA is no different, right? It's kind of governing how we are structured. And I would posit that this simply, if you will, increases the amplitude of how we are, because I've seen it make people more resilient to things that would harm them and accelerate the things that are beneficial for them. And so I think what this really is it's just taking who and what we are expressed as a waveform and increasing the amplitude and making it more conducive to working with the environment, whether that's being in the sun, you know, grounding your feet out, eating different foods. I just see it consistently expressing in ways that are more harmonious and balanced with all of the environments. So I'll leave it at that.
That was a wonderful explanation. And I know that in the interest of respecting both of your time, because we've gotten to do 2 episodes and they were both wonderful, I want to just wrap up by asking where people can find the different technologies and products that we've talked about. I believe there's also a way they can try the quantum upgrade, but I'll of course include those links in the show notes. But where can people find those and find both of you and keep learning?
Yep, so that would be LeelaQ.com. That's LeelaQ.com for the physical Leela Quantum products. And then quantumupgrade.io for the quantum upgrade, which you can try for free. I don't know if we probably had like a special for your audience. Let's just make one right now on the fly, 15 days for free for your audience when they put in code Katie. Let's just do that, code Katie. Or you want wellness? Sorry, wellness mama is probably better, right? It's just longer. You pick real quick and we'll make that happen for
Let's
15
do
days free trial.
Katie to keep it shorter. That's awesome.
Katie, okay, we'll do Katie for 15 days free trial, so you can see for yourself.
Wonderful. Well, all of those I will link in the show notes. And I know you guys have also published some detail related to things we've talked about. I'll link to all of that for you guys listening on the go. That's at wellnessmama.com. But Philipp and Ian, it's always an absolute joy to get to talk to you. I'm so grateful we got to reconnect here. Thank you so much for the time and for everything you've shared.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
And thank you for listening and sharing your most valuable resources, your time, your energy, and your attention with us today. We're all so grateful that you did. And I hope that you will join me again on the next episode of the Wellness Mama podcast.